Hi, I'm Kevin Hassel. I'm the chair of the Mid-Atlantic Committee on the Ocean. Just want to take a second to welcome you all today to our poster session. So this is really great. This is our first poster session that we've had set up as part of our forum. Previously, we had planned to do these as part of the in-person events that we had pre-COVID. And I hope that this continues in the future as we do this, because I think it's really critical to engage with our youth and early career professionals on a lot of the work that they're doing out here. So it really helps inform what we're doing. So, we're really excited about these presentations. Each of them will kind of address some of the issues that we've discussed over the past few days. It's research towards offshore wind energy, chasing ocean conditions off of our coasts, impacts of ocean acidification. I just want to take a moment to say thanks in advance to our presenters for taking time out of their schedules to make this session a success. I know it's finals week. It's a really tough time to be pulled away, but I think that it's really great to see the work that you've done. So thank you. Just a few notes on the session here. Each of our authors will present in alphabetical order by the last name, and so they'll have about 5 minutes to go through their poster. During that time, the audience members can type their questions into the questions chat pane of the webinar system there. At the end of the presentations, we'll then read those questions aloud and direct them to the proper panelists. So this session is also being recorded and will be posted alongside with the rest of the forum sessions on our website at midatlanticocean.org. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carl Villacova, and he'll go run through some additional instructions for our presenters. So thank you again.
Thanks, Kevin. Can you hear me? Give me a nod. Very good. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks again to our presenters and for all of our guests for being here today. I'm Carl Villacova from Monmouth University's Urban Coast Institute and a member of MARCO's Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal team. To our presenters, just another quick reminder: when I call your name, please just click on the buttons to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And then when you're done with your individual presentations, you can turn off your mic and camera. After all of the presentations, we'd like you to turn your cameras back on for the Q&A portion and unmute yourself when any questions do come your way. And with that, we'll get started appropriately with the first person who I received a poster from, and that is Samantha Bingaman. And please correct me if I get anyone's names wrong. So go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your work.
Thanks, Carl. I'm happy to go first. The curse of a last name at the beginning of the alphabet. It's nice to see or know that everyone is here, although I can't see your faces. And thank you to Mako for being able to present my research, or not just my research, the research of a wonderful team. So without further ado, I'll get straight into it. My team and I would like to present Winds of Change, examining attitude shift regarding an offshore wind project. My co-authors are my advisor, Dr. Firestone, and soon to be Dr. Aaron Russell of the University of Delaware, and then Dr. David Bidwell of the University of Rhode Island. So I hope you can read most of the text on this poster, but I'll talk through it. Basically, our reasoning for studying attitude shift in the offshore wind sector has been mainly to answer the call for longitudinal research. There has been quite a paucity of longitudinal research, which is really valuable for tracking attitudes in time, avoids recall bias, and really gets to the point of how these attitudes are shifting, because as we know, offshore wind projects take years, sometimes even decades to construct, and attitudes change over time. So we really want to understand that and allow our transition to the green energy sector to be not only harmonious and fair, but also responsive to people's concerns, opinions, etc. So with that introduction, our study focuses on the Block Island offshore wind farm, the first offshore wind farm of the United States up in Rhode Island. This is a mixed methods study, so this makes it the first quantitative and qualitative mixed methods longitudinal study. And basically from 2016 to 2018, Dr. Firestone and Dr. David Bidwell and some colleagues collected information via survey from residents on Block Island, as well as on coastal Rhode Island. The offshore wind farm is about 4 or so miles away from Block Island, and I always get this wrong. I think it's 16 to 18 miles from the coast of of Rhode Island. The significance of survey collection in 2016 and 2018 is because 2016 was the year, or the survey was administered right before the turbines went up. So we really get a pre-turbine look. And then 2018 was the year after the turbines had been spinning for about a year. So we have that quantitative data, but we also follow up in 2020 with some qualitative interviews, which really allowed us to have interviewees put their opinions into their own words. If you move to the center column, the first column at the very end, this part's really important, our attitude groupings. Oh.
Is that better? If I zoom in like that?
Scroll down a little bit.
Sure.
And then to the left, pan to the left.
How's that?
That's perfect, thank you. So we have our attitude groupings here, which we were able to collect and really find out if people's attitudes shifted or they stayed stable over time. And those 5 categories are the bolded words at the bottom. Those that stayed stable opposed, those that stayed stable undecided or they hadn't yet made up their mind, and those who were stable supporters. We also have those that shifted to a more negative standpoint and those to a more positive standpoint on the turbines. As you can see in the parentheses, we have a majority of supporters, but we also have a fair amount of people that fell into the other attitude subgroups as well. So now if you want to scroll to the middle column, perfect. What we found are 4 major themes that I'm going to review with everyone today. So first, we see that attitudes change net positively over time. If you look closely at the graph in 2016, those are the 3 bars on the left. You can see that we have a majority of support, but a fair amount of unsure and opposed categories as well. And this just basically puts what I introduced with the attitude subgroups visually. And then in 2018, we see an increase in support and a decrease in the other 2 categories. And when we do the statistical analysis, we see that the movement in between those categories is net positive. 16% of attitudes shifted positive and only 8% shifted negatively. If you could scroll down just a little bit. In theme number 2, if you're following along, it's okay if you can't go all, if you can't. Okay, perfect. When we look at attitude strength attributes, which are basically traits about how people feel about the project, for example, we looked at how much knowledge and views somebody has about the project, how confident they were about the project, how much discussion they did with family and friends in 2016. We also looked at how directly affected people would be by the project, but that didn't show up as statistically significant in our analysis. But basically the reason I'm throwing these words at you is because we see that those that were more stable, the stable opposers and the stable supporters, were the most knowledgeable, the most confident, and discussed the project the most with their family and friends. And that's sort of what that chart is showing, the sort of, I think it's convex, no, it's concave. I always get confused between those 2. But the more U-shaped pattern, we see that on the ends, those opposers and supporters have the higher means of knowledge, confidence, and discussion, whereas if you track closer to the point in the middle, the shifters and the undecideds had lower levels. So that's a really interesting psychological principle that we brought in and really shows that stability and shift is influenced by those 3 traits. If you could scoot to the rightmost column, I just have the last 3 or the last 2 points, and this gets to the trade-offs almost between the balance of uses of the oceanscape. So when we introduce offshore wind, there are people that are concerned about commercial fishing, recreational fishing, tourism. So we found that the top concerns or the effects of the turbines that people would be most concerned about also were common among certain groups. So the opposers, negative shifters, and several undecideds listed viewshed, fishing, and boating as their top concerns about what the turbines would affect, whereas the positive shifters and supporters listed energy security, renewable energy, and environmental impacts, either positive or negative, as their top concerns. Interestingly, all groups had a high listing of wildlife as their main concerns, so fishing and migratory bird impacts. And lastly, we see this balance between shifters. When we talk about attitude shift, we would like to know what direction that shift was in. And we find that that shift is dictated by this balance as well of trade-offs between process and aesthetics and the benefits of the project. Whereas both groups, positive and negative shifters, would acknowledge certain drawbacks of the process, the planning process, or the aesthetics, we saw that negative shifters placed that above the benefits, so that had more weight in their minds than the benefits, whereas the opposite happened with the positive shifters. They acknowledged the drawbacks, but placed the positive shift above those drawbacks. So there is a lot going on, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'd like to end just by concluding why this research is applicable to various offshore wind projects. As we know, we're seeing quite a burgeoning industry happening along the East Coast. We see that many attitudes, at least in this study, were stable, but some shift due to levels of knowledge, confidence, and discussion, as well as those balance of the process and aesthetics versus benefits, which I just talked about in the fourth theme. We also see that because of all of this research, it really underscores the need for engagement both before and after the project is built, because my last point, if you could scroll down just a bit, is really encapsulated by the quotes at the very bottom, and it's okay if we don't see them too. But the quotes at the very bottom of the center column is that many people felt like they were left with the good, whereas others felt like they were left behind. And that is the part where, as I said, really underscores the need for engagement, not just at the beginning of a project, but after the project as well. Yep, you can see those quotes now. So in the interest of time, I will conclude. Thank you to the Delaware Municipal Energy Corporation and First State Marine Wind, who funded my research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and stick around for the question and answer period. Our second scheduled presenter, Aidan Bodio-Lamaki, regretfully could not make it. He was feeling under the weather, but if you do visit the poster session page, which I put the link in the question and chat pane, you can find out some more information about his research. So our next presenter then will be Sarah Borsetti. Sarah, if you can just, there you go. I see you, and
can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome.
Let me scoot down to your poster.
Sounds good.
And here it is.
All right.
Would you like me to zoom in on any point?
I think that just for so it doesn't have to reload every time, maybe if people want to go to the link you sent in the chat, it might be easier for them, because I'm going to direct people to specific figures. So that might be easier, just so it's not reloading.
Great.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Borsetti, and my contact information can be found at the bottom of my poster if you're interested in connecting. I recently completed my PhD at Rutgers University working with Dr. Daphne Monroe, and that's at the Haskin Shellfish Research Lab in South Jersey. My poster today will touch on the topic of climate-induced ocean changes. And once my poster starts loading, I'll be presenting the climate growth relationship for an offshore gastropod, which is found within the mid-Atlantic waters. So some background on this species, which you can see in the bottom left. It's relatively unstudied and unfished in the US, but economically it's really important in other parts of its range, like the UK. Due to a variety of its life history traits, this species is vulnerable to overexploitation. Currently, it's unmanaged in the US, with my work being the first to examine its local life history characteristics. For my work, samples were collected offshore of New Jersey, and you can see that in Figure 1. I aged a subset of whelk collected using their statoliths, and you can see that also down at the bottom in Figure 2. And these structures are very similar to fish otoliths. Once the data was collected, I fit 2 candidate growth models to see which provided a better fit. And this was the first study to examine growth of this species in the US. These growth parameters are also important because this is an unfished population. I then used the statolith growth increment data to create a biochronology and used mixed effects models to examine how past climate affected whelk growth at different ages. And this work can assist in forecasting how future warming could affect this population. So moving on to the center panel, the growth curves of the US population differed from other assessed whelk populations. And we think it's likely due to differences in the life history strategies between populations, probably due to the local environments. And this is all described in Figure 4 in that lengthy caption. Then a series of mixed effects models were developed to examine internal and external forces impacting whelk growth. In Table 1, you can see the fixed and random effects used in these models. And then the temperature data was a 10-year time series obtained from the Doppio model, and you can see that in Figure 5. The optimal model was used to determine how growth varies due to changes in bottom temperature. I found with an increasing annual bottom temperature, whelk growth increased across all ages, and that's in Figure 6A. However, the inclusion of certain seasonal bottom temperatures was also supported and resulted in an age-dependent growth response. And you can see that in Figure 6B. So with increasing summer bottom temperature, it had a positive impact on young whelk and a negative impact on older whelk. So some take-home messages from this work. I found that age at maturity, which could be used for future management of the species. It appears that whelk in this region display plasticity in their ability to cope with a range of temperatures. But increasing seasonal temperature could be problematic for this cold water species in the future with climate change. Lastly, this data is from an unfished population and can serve as a model to understand how other heavily exploited populations may be impacted by both fishing and climate. And for more information on this work, I have details on the poster for the paper that recently published, and you can find all those details there. And I want to thank you guys for your time, and I appreciate this opportunity for presenting my work today.
Thank you so much for that. That was excellent. And to the audience, I encourage you to, start adding your questions to the queue, and that way, when the presentations are over, we'll be ready to roll. Our next presenter is Brian Fry. Hopefully, I pronounced that name, but correct me if I did not.
Yep, that's how I pronounce it.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you guys for allowing me this opportunity to share my research today. My name is Brian Fry, and I'm a first-year master's student in the geography department at the University of Delaware. My advisors are Dana Barone and Jing Gao, and this is sort of the plan for the research that I'm going to complete over the summer and into next year for my master's thesis. So my interest in this topic is looking into the impacts that urbanization and climate change might have on coastal winds in Delaware, especially looking towards the end of the 21st century. So climate change and urbanization are both factors that have the potential to impact coastal winds, but there have been relatively limited studies looking into detailed cases of this. And coastal winds are important because of the impact that they have on temperature moderation. For example, with the sea breeze circulation in the summer, it's very important for keeping the temperatures over land on the cooler side, because you're bringing that cooler marine air in. So that is one important aspect. Another is obviously for offshore wind. You know, it's important for developers to have some idea of what to expect in the future if they're expecting higher wind resource with the changing climate and urbanization, or lower, or not very much impact. So any result really will be interesting for this topic. The sea breeze circulation is the largest influence on the wind in Delaware, but there is some lack of research looking into how it might change in the future. It's been fairly well characterized in the present, but looking into the future is something that I would like to study here. And there are various studies that show changing urbanization could have an impact on the sea breeze timing and intensity. So the main research questions for this paper are, will high climate change scenario RCP 8.5 have a significant impact on average coastal wind patterns in the mid-Atlantic? So RCP 8.5, if you don't know, is basically the highest level of climate change in the IPCC report, where there's not much effort put into lowering CO2 emissions, and the temperature changes are drastic. So will that alone have an impact on the coastal wind patterns in the mid-Atlantic? The second question that I would like to look at is, how will increased urbanization in coastal Delaware affect horizontal temperature gradients, surface roughness, pressure gradients, and will those changes have a significant impact on the sea breeze circulation and the offshore wind resource? And finally, combining those two effects, will they interact? Will the climate change and urbanization interact to cause larger changes, or will they conflict with each other and result in no changes or smaller changes? So one of the interesting things about this project is that I don't really know what to expect, because when you have increased land cover, I'm looking at the diagram now in the center of the middle pane. I hope you all can see that. When you have an increase in urban land cover, the arrow on the top is pointing towards a larger temperature gradient between the ocean and the land. Now this is because when you have more buildings and asphalt, parking lots on land, you'll have more radiation absorbed and you'll have higher temperatures. Meanwhile, over the ocean, you won't have that development, so the ocean temperatures will remain unchanged. This will result in a larger temperature gradient between the land and the ocean. And that will then result in a larger gradient in pressure, because as you have warmer temperatures over the land, the pressure decreases. So you'll have locally low pressure over the land. And then over the ocean, you'll have the same higher pressure with the colder temperatures. So the wind speeds will naturally increase as you have a larger pressure gradient between the ocean and the land. That's what that green box with increased surface wind speeds represents. However, on the other hand, when you have increased urbanization, you have more buildings, you have skyscrapers, well, maybe in Delaware, not skyscrapers, but apartment complexes, factories, warehouses, more houses. So you increase the surface roughness of the land, which creates more friction and drag on the wind speeds. So you would expect a decrease in surface wind speeds. So those two factors are in conflict with each other, which I find an interesting part of this project. So for this project, I will be using WRF, the Weather Research and Forecasting Model, to simulate future climate scenarios. And I will be forcing the WRF model with a climate model developed by NCAR, the Community Earth System Model version 2. So this figure on the bottom of the center pane shows you some of the physics options that I have at the moment for my WRF simulations and the domain setups. So the outer domain is basically the entire East Coast area, and that is at a resolution of 15-kilometer grid spacing. And then the inner domain is a resolution of 3 kilometers, and it basically just covers southern New Jersey and the Delmarva Peninsula. So previous studies have looked at how winds might change in the Northeast due to climate, but they haven't really gone down to a resolution that's high enough to capture the complex coastal environment. So that's kind of the additional step that I want to take here with these simulations. In the right column at the top, you'll see the different scenarios that I would like to run. So as I mentioned, I'll be forcing it with Community Earth System Model 2 data, which has been shown to fairly accurately represent future wind speed changes with minimal bias over the Atlantic Ocean. So the simulations are listed from 1, 2, 3, 4. The first simulation will just be a current conditions. I'll be running for 11 years, 2010 to 2020, just to get a baseline. The second simulation will be a high climate change, so RCP 8.5, and that will be in the years 2090 to 2100. The third simulation will be high urbanization in the present year. So I'll be changing the land use in Delaware for present conditions. And then finally, I'll be combining those two, so high climate change and high urbanization, again in 2090 through 2100. So these simulations, which are 44 years of simulations, as you can imagine, will take some serious computational efforts. So I'll be using the supercomputer at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, or NCAR, and they're expected to take about 3 months to run. The final thing that I would like to just mention is the figure in the right column shows the inland bays and watershed 2007 land use. So the thing to focus on here is the pink color, which represents developed areas. So what you can see is that along the coast in Rehoboth and Bethany Beach and similar areas, there's a fair amount of development, but as soon as you move, a couple miles inland, it's mainly still farmland or forest. So there's a lot of potential for urbanization in southern Delaware that could play a role in this project. So I'd like to thank you guys for listening to what I plan to do for my master's thesis, and look forward to hearing any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Brian. Our next presenter is Natalie Khazar. And again, correct me if I have that pronunciation wrong. Okay, very good. Let me switch to your poster.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity to show my research. My name is Natalie Khazar. I'm a student at Middlesex County College, and the focus of my research project is to measure seasonal variations of ocean water at Sandy Hook in New Jersey. This is an independent research study that has been ongoing since 2016. The data from this research can be used to help detect changes in water quality, which may be due to environmental factors such as climate change or pollution. For this project, I took water samples from Sandy Hook beaches on the ocean side at lots C and D, and the bay side at lots C and Officers Row. With these samples, I conducted water quality tests, which included testing for pH, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and temperature. For my research, I hypothesized that the pH would be higher in the summer months compared to any other season, I expected the salinity to be lower in the winter months while dissolved oxygen to be higher in winter months. For the pH test, I added a wide range indicator to my sample water and compared it to the pH color code, which can be seen on the top of the poster. To test for salinity, I took the temperature and specific gravity measurements of my sample water in a graduated cylinder via a thermometer and hydrometer, then used a salinity chart to find the salinity level. Testing for dissolved oxygen included several steps requiring multiple chemical reagents, including manganese sulfate, alkaline potassium iodine iodide, sulfuric acid, sodium thiosulfate, and a starch indicator. The final step of this test requires titration of sodium thiosulfate until the solution became clear, then a reading is taken from the titrator. If you look at the bottom of the screen under results, all of the data from 2016 to 2021, I combined and graphed the results. In the first graph, under results on the upper left side are the pH values from the summer month from 2016 to 2020, while the graph underneath are the pH values for the winter month from 2017 to 2021. We have Bayside as the pink lines and Oceanside as the blue lines. I hypothesized that the pH would be higher in the summer months, but the data actually showed that pH stays fairly consistent with a pH between 8 to 9 throughout all seasons. Next to those graphs, we have the dissolved oxygen graphs. I hypothesized that the levels would increase in the winter months, and the data did support this. As shown in the dissolved oxygen graphs, the ideal range is 5 to 14 parts per million. For Bayside, we had an average summer reading of 6 parts per million versus the average winter reading of 8 parts per million. And on the ocean side, we also had an average reading of 6 parts per million in the winter and 8 parts per million in the summer. On the bottom left side, we have the salinity graphs, and I hypothesized that the readings would be lower in the winter, and the data also supported this. In the fall, the salinity on the Bayside should be around 25 to 30 parts per thousand, and the data average out to be 25 parts per thousand in the fall months and 19 parts per thousand in the winter months. On the ocean side, the average salinity should be around 30 to 35 parts per thousand, and the data average out to be 27 parts per thousand in the fall and 27 parts per thousand in the winter. Even though my part in this research project is concluded, all tests will be continued by future MC research students. Future research may include adding the northernmost part of Sandy Hook as a new location for tests, as well as seeing if COVID-19 and sewage outflows could have any effect on water quality. This concludes my presentation, and I'd like to thank NJC Grant Consortium for giving me permission to conduct all my research, and everyone at MC for their support on this research.
Thank you so much for that, Natalie. Our next presenter is McKenna Lynn Latinsky, and I'm going to actually invite you to share your screen for this one.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, I hope you all are seeing this. But my name is McKenna Latinsky, and I'm a senior undergraduate student at St. Mary's College of Maryland. And I'm actually going to be graduating on Saturday, which is exciting. My poster is focused on a high school level experiment and lesson plan that I created over this semester, or last semester actually, concerning ocean acidification and how it has the ability to negatively impact aspects of maritime heritage and underwater archaeological sites. The main goal of this experiment and lesson plan is public outreach and education to high school level students and members of the general public. To give you all some background research and information, ocean acidification has the potential to disintegrate the concretions and metal artifacts that are commonly found on historical wrecks, which leads these wrecks themselves to lose their integrity and their ability to serve as artificial reefs, which can play a role in a healthy ecosystem. Additionally, warmer and more acidic seawater has the potential to disintegrate the calcium carbonate that makes up oyster shells on Native American sites, in which case the stories that can be uncovered by studying them will never be learned. This experiment gives students firsthand experience observing the corrosion of metal artifacts commonly found on historical shipwrecks in submerged contexts, including brass, copper, stainless steel, and steel with zinc plating, as well as observing the disintegration of oyster shells, representing Native American shell middens, within saltwater of different levels of acidity, representing both present and future ocean acidification conditions. By taking observations over a 1-month-long period in time, with approximately 45 minutes of observations undertaken per week, this experiment provides students and members of the public an opportunity to better understand underwater cultural resources and learn about how ocean acidification can lead to the loss of cultural history and heritage. By taking chances, making mistakes, and getting messy, in the words of Miss Frizzle from the famous Magic School Bus TV series, it is through a hands-on approach that this experiment promotes learning and discovery and helps students develop a better understanding of the scientific method through direct interaction with the data collected. Now, you all in the audience might be asking yourself, well, how does the experiment actually work? Well, students will begin the experiment by pouring 4 liters of water into a large bowl and then proceeding to add 8 tablespoons of sea salt into the water, and then the students should stir until thoroughly combined to represent the approximate salinity in our oceans today. Mason jars will be labeled with the materials to be placed inside, so all of those metals and oyster shells, and studied, and the pH levels the jars will contain. A pH meter or pH test strips will allow students to measure the initial pH of the seawater, and then they will proceed to add baking soda and vinegar in very small increments to raise and lower the pH in the water. Students should select increments that are equally spaced and accurately represent present and future projected ocean acidification conditions to be reconstructed within their mason jars. For example, students and educators can choose to start with a pH of 8.1, which is the present pH in our oceans today, and then gradually becoming more acidic within the next few jars. So then having a pH of 7.9, then 7.7, and then ending with a pH of 7.5, which is the projected ocean acidification condition for the year 2100. Students and educators can also choose to conduct a rapid test of pure vinegar to see faster results. Once all of the mason jars are complete with all of the correct pH measurements and all the materials that are placed inside, observations will be logged for further discussion, and the results of the experiment should be written up or presented in a scientific manner. If you have further questions about this experiment, which is currently available on the Mid-Atlantic Coastal Ocean Acidification Network website, or any of the other products that I produced during my time undertaking an independent study under Dr. Susan Langley, please contact me via email, which is provided on my poster. Thank you all very much for your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have during the question and answer period after all of the presentations have concluded.
Okay, thank you for that, McKenna. And our next presenter will be Pearson Orr. Pearson, if you can share your screen. I am seeing, is that correct? It says parasite on it.
That is the wrong. Okay, let me fix this. Shoot, I do not know how to change this. Here. Did that change anything?
No. Yes, now I see it. You're all set.
Okay. Sorry, there's a lot of stuff on my. Oh shoot. So yeah, wait. So you can see just the poster, or is all of my other stuff?
Developing a rip current network for Long Island's ocean beaches. You just might want to expand your screen so it fills up the full space, but it is showing.
Okay. I think this is the only way it will show sorry about the technical difficulties.
No problem. Take your time.
Okay, so let's see. Okay, so thank you very much. Hello, my name is Pearson Orr. I'm a junior at Cornell University. Unlike a lot of the other people here, I'm not a scientist. Haven't done any scientific research. But my project is developing a rip current network for Long Island's ocean beaches. And I shouldn't say my project at all because I'm under the mentorship of Miss Kathleen Fallon from the New York Sea Grant, and both Miss Mary Ford and Kirsten Wakefield from Maracus. So yeah, I think talking about this project, the first thing that I want to talk about is the actual study site. So the study site for this project is the Long Island beaches of New York, and this ranges from the Rockaways to Montauk, the Atlantic Ocean beaches. And the reason for this study site is that the majority of rip current fatalities that occur in New York occur on the Long Island area. And I mean, this is shown by this graph, but it's also over the last 5 years, 87.5% of the rip current fatalities have occurred in this area. And the goal of this network is to bring together professionals from different fields to improve communication and decrease rip current fatalities. So the original goal, this network began in the summer of 2020, and the original goals were to develop a participant list of network members from across different professionals, send out a needs assessment survey to assess the needs and wants of the network participants, and ultimately to create a workshop or meeting for all professionals to come together and be able to connect with each other. So my primary responsibility at the beginning of this network was to put together an initial participant list. And this included a wide variety of different professionals all across Long Island. And one of the things that we established when we sent out our needs assessment later was the fact that there was a decent amount of interprofessional communication or networking that was occurring. So this means like academics, or different schools, or forecasters communicating with each other, or even lifeguards at different beaches communicating about rip currents. But one of the goals of this network was to have improved communication between professions. And so these different professions include academics / researchers at universities, weather forecasters such as those at the National Weather Service, on the ground lifeguards, government officials, and non-governmental organizations or NGOs. And so after developing this network, our next step was to create a needs assessment survey to send out to the people we have established or people we've developed, and to essentially see if they would be interested in being part of a network and what they would want to see out of a network. And through this information, we were able to establish a core organizational team of a handful of members who are very interested in this topic and were going to help us plan and organize the upcoming workshop. And so these people are like leaders in their field, and they come from each of the different professions, so we could have a good representation for the workshop. And after having these meetings and planning, we were able to host our first workshop in November 2020, and I think it was a pretty good success. One of the things that we utilized was the use of breakout rooms. Originally, this project was meant to be done in person before COVID, but because of COVID-19, we were forced to have all communications and the workshop held virtually. But using breakout rooms and the virtual setting, we were able to improve attendance, and it was easier for people to attend because they didn't have to drive or like like mess up their schedules for this. And having breakout rooms allowed actual good participation and facilitation of discussion that led to new resources and contacts to help the network. So one of these was the Weather Ready Nation Ambassadors, which is something that I've been working on, which not all of these organizations or groups are necessarily involved in rip currents, but a lot of them have some interest in rip currents, and we've been reaching out to them to see if they would be interested in being a member or a auxiliary contact for the network. So after hosting this workshop, we're essentially moving on to next steps, and the network, I think, is going very strong, especially with the onset of summer and the reopening of the beaches. With the reopening of the beaches, one of the things that we really want to work on is integration of lifeguards into the network. So we've had a lot of success with other groups, especially researchers who are very invested in this. But lifeguards, mainly because of their seasonal employment, have proven the most difficult demographic. And hopefully with the return to beach season and return of lifeguards thinking about beach hazards, we'll be able to incorporate them better into the network. And so besides that, we are working on another workshop for this month to talk about, or to meet with the network and have people connect before the beach season opens again. And we're also working on network branding. So this includes the name, which we've named SHARC, or the Surf Hazards Awareness Research and Coordination. But also includes a logo, which we're working on with a graphic designer, and eventually the creation of a network. So finally, the last point is this network, which only encompasses Long Island, is hopefully can be a model for other mid-Atlantic regions beyond Long Island if it's successful. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Pearson. And don't go anywhere. You can just stay on screen. And I'd like to, at this point, invite all of the other presenters to come on too, and we can start our Q&A session. For attendees, please continue to add any questions you have into the system. And we've got about 10 minutes left to go through them. So let's see, the first one is for Brian, and it is a two-parter. And it says, I believe the global prediction is that ocean temperatures will increase. So will the differential between urban heat increases be kept pace by rising ocean temperatures? Then no real change. And then it continues, if you could talk more about the premise that high urbanization will continue. Urbanization may stay the same or even decrease. Land use and protections may prevent further development and urbanization.
Yeah, thanks. Those are good questions. To address the first part, yes, ocean temperatures are expected to increase, especially under high climate scenario. But the thing is that the high heat capacity of water generally leads to ocean temperatures lagging behind the increases over land. So basically, if you have increased radiation coming in due to increases in CO2, you'll have that effect impacting land quicker than it impacts the ocean. So although they're both increasing, the land temperatures are expected to increase, react more rapidly to the forcings. And along the lines of the second question, yes, urbanization, definitely, we don't know what's going to happen. There could, I mean, it would be probably good for the environment if they were limited. But for this study, I'm focusing on a high urbanization scenario to see what could happen if there weren't any limitations and if urbanization increased rapidly.
Okay, this next one is for Samantha. Could you talk about how you were able to reduce bias in your survey and if you were able to include underrepresented communities?
That is a great question. So I'll first speak to the bias question with the survey that was conducted, or the quantitative aspect, the survey that was conducted 2016, 2018, and there was also a 2017 one in there, but we just used the 2016 and 2018. Bias was controlled by assessing non-response, and not only were all of the households on Block Island surveyed, but there was a representative sample taken of the mainland community as well. And then when we went back in the interviews, our interviewees were purposively sampled, but we attempted to decrease the amount of bias in our coding process qualitatively in terms of using in vivo coding and techniques, using a lot of inductive or bias controls during our inductive and deductive coding processes. So we, in our paper, we do discuss the bias. So we did quite a bit to try to control that, because unfortunately that bias that plagues a lot of quantitative or qualitative studies. Carl, would you mind reminding me of the second part of that question, please?
I'll read the full to you again. Could you talk about how you were able to reduce bias in your survey, and if you were able to include underrepresented communities?
Underrepresented communities. So this is a study that focuses largely on Block Island and mainland Rhode Island, so underrepresented communities that may have been closer to the center of Rhode Island or from other states that are tourist populations and aren't necessarily seeing the project every day. No, we did not sample those people because the study was mainly focused on finding out how people's attitudes change based on their daily interactions with the turbines. If they can see it from their daily routine, if it affects their summer vacation, etc. I hope that answers the question a little bit. And I know that I have another question in the chat, but I don't know if you want.
Yeah, we'll keep you going since you've got your mic on, and that is, did the change in energy generation from diesel generation and associated interconnection to the mainland with the wind farm have an impact on opinion?
Okay, thank you for the previous question too. I hope I didn't cut that off, and I'm definitely receptive to a follow-up question as well. Yes, the answer to this question is a resounding yes. When I spoke about the benefits, I spoke about the benefits sort of vaguely, but when you break down the benefits into both the local and the global benefits, both of those had a large interaction in increasing the support and the positive shift. When we talk about the global benefits, obviously we talk, actually I'm going to pull from one of the quotes that we got from our interviewees, the collective good. A lot of people look to the collective good that the turbines created or impacted in terms of climate change. But yes, the generation by diesel, or the production of energy by diesel generators, doing away with that, and the high-speed internet to key institutions on the island were large parts of the local benefits. And we look to that to ask if this makes our study generalizable still. Although coastal communities may already have, or along the East Coast may already have interconnection to a high-speed internet resource, or they may have other sources of energy other than diesel generators. The fact of the matter is that there are still quite a few individual unique benefits that these communities will receive. And in that, we think that this same reaction because of the local benefits will be very common throughout other communities along the East Coast. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you. The next one actually goes to Sarah. Apologies if I missed it, but were variables beyond bottom temperature examined?
Great question. So within the 5-minute presentation, you don't really get to go over the details, but I used a series of mixed effects models to examine the internal and external forces on wealth growth. So the fixed effects included, or tested in the series of models, included age, sex, age at capture, and temperature. And the random effects were individual wealth ID and year. So a bit more there. So if there's more questions on that, I can answer them.
Very good. I actually have one which I'll direct to Natalie. I was interested in reading your abstract where you mentioned that you thought, or you'd like to do some further investigation on the impacts of COVID-19 and combined sewerage overflows into the system on your readings. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on what you might see from that and what you'd be looking for.
So on the Bayside in Sandy Hook, there is a sewage line that runs through it, and sometimes the sewage can overflow into the Bayside. And so we were looking, or I was looking to see if that could have any impact on the marine life in the water, or if that would have any impact on the samples that I would be taking. However, I really wasn't able to do that because while we do know that COVID can be found in the sewage, we aren't really sure yet how to test for that. So I'm hoping that any future students can find a way to test for that, because the sewage outflow could have a very big impact on the samples, and so having that in the water may have another impact as well.
Thank you.
I hope that answered your question.
That's great, thank you. We have a question here for Pearson. Have you been accessing multicultural communities when you look for stakeholders for your network? It's a great question.
Thank you for the question. That is a great question. When looking for stakeholders for the network, I don't think there's been like a specific focus on multicultural communities, which I think is important, but it's been more of a focus on just finding people interested in rip currents. It's not necessarily the largest group, and or having professionals interested in rip currents, and actually getting people to communicate or buy in, especially through email or phone communication, has been slightly difficult. So something I talked about with the beaches is that like we've had trouble getting lifeguards invested because of like they're not primarily interested in rip currents. It's just like a very small part of what they do. But there have been considerations, not necessarily about multicultural, but more about socioeconomic, especially with the differences in New York City versus the Hamptons, and like East Hampton, they have some of the best rip current like programming or like awareness. And one of our goals or one of our considerations was to not just put up East Hampton or like the Hamptons and say, look at these people, they're doing the best work, they have all the resources, they have 10 jet skis, they're able to save anyone, but really to address like the entire community and the differences within it.
Thank you so much for that. And seeing no more questions in the queue, and we're exactly at just about 1:45, I would just like to quickly share my screen one more time to preview tomorrow's session. And thank you all again so much for being here. Really, best of luck to all of you on your studies and everything. And thank you for kicking this off. And we hope to make this an annual tradition. And you guys have been, the first one. So congratulations, and thanks again for being here. Tomorrow we have the final day of the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Forum with 2 sessions: conservation and living marine resources management in the face of a changing climate, and finally the closing plenary. So please register for tomorrow's sessions at midatlanticocean.org. And with that, we'll end for the day. Thank you so much for everybody for being here and for presenting.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone.